Hey everyone, and a big hello and welcome back to our Bible study. If this is your first time here, welcome. Today we're going to talk about Deuteronomy chapter 24, which would be a weird chapter for you to jump in on, if this was your first study, but hey, it might happen. So Deuteronomy chapter 24, the PDF that you're seeing up on the screen is available to you for free on our website. When did the events of this chapter take place? Well, we've been talking about Moses reminding the Israelites about God's laws, and he's doing this in about 1450 BC, right before the Israelites enter the land of Canaan, or the Promised Land. Our main characters for this chapter we've already mentioned. We've got the Israelites, who are a large nation of people that came out of Egyptian slavery. They spent about 40 years wandering in the wilderness as they were making their way to the Promised Land, which God had promised to their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give to them as a home. We also have Moses, who is God's selected leader to lead the Israelites on this journey. That takes us to our map, and we've already discussed a couple of these places here, but in terms of this chapter specifically and where Moses was talking to the Israelites, we are still in Moab, to the east side of the Dead Sea, up by Mount Pisgah, which you'll see on the map, right underneath the land of the Amorites. Now we move on over to our second page, which is our outline section, and I've got everything under one heading. It's the same heading that we've been using for a couple chapters now, various laws and commands, because there's so much going on in this chapter, so many different topics covered that we just can't break it down into nice even sections. So verses 1 through 22, various laws and commands. So if an Israelite man divorced his wife, he was not allowed to marry her again if she remarried and her second husband either died or divorced her. God says none of that. Can't marry her a second time if she's already been remarried. We're also told that a newly married man was to be excused from military and civic service for 1 year so that he could have kind of a honeymoon period and enjoy the time with his new wife. Israelites were not allowed to take their neighbors' millstones, which they would have used to grind grain, and make bread and things. They weren't allowed to take them as collateral for a loan, because those millstones were an essential part of everyday life, and everyone would have needed one or access to one. We're told that if a Hebrew kidnapped another Israelite, and forced them into slavery or sold them as slaves, then the person who did the kidnapping was supposed to be put to death. You were not allowed to kidnap people and sell them into slavery. That's a big no-no. When a case of leprosy was found in Israel, leprosy is a bacterial disease that eats away your nerves. When that was found in Israel, the people were supposed to carefully heed the instructions that God had given in previous books like Exodus, Leviticus. They were supposed to listen to the priests and to take care of those cases of leprosy as God prescribed. If a lender loaned something to a poor Israelite, the lender was not allowed to go into the poor man's house to collect his pledge, or basically I think this is the collateral for the loan. The poor man was supposed to meet the lender outside of his house. A creditor was not to take a poor man's garment as a pledge and to keep it overnight, because we're told here and in Exodus chapter 22 that poor man, that garment is all that he has, right, to sleep in. So a creditor was not allowed to take that from him and keep it overnight, even if a loan was in play in that situation. Mistreating poor workers and taking advantage of poor workers was forbidden. Wages were supposed to be paid the same day that they were earned, because those poor people depended on them. Parents could not be put to death for the sins of their children, and vice versa under the law. The Israelites were not to take advantage of foreigners, widows, or orphans. They were supposed to remember how they had been mistreated as slaves in Egypt and not do that to anybody else. And then the last couple instructions that we have in this chapter deal with farmers and harvesting their fields. So if you were a farmer and you had a field and say you had grain in your field, you harvested your field, but you forgot one of the sheaves of grain and you left it behind. You were not supposed to go back to recover that sheaf of grain. You were supposed to leave it there so that the needy in your community could eat from it. The same was true if you had an olive orchard. You were supposed to go through your field one time and harvest, but you were you were not supposed to return a second time to go over the field again to pick anything that you had forgotten. Anything that was forgotten was to be left there for the needy. Same was true if you had a vineyard. You were not supposed to strip the grapevines. You were supposed to leave them for those who were in the most need. So God definitely has a heart for the poor and the unfortunate people, and he built that into the laws that the Israelites were supposed to follow. So now as we move down to our application, I want to take an application from these verses that we just discussed. And this is part of the reason I love reading the Old Testament. It's because it shows us these interesting ways that God works providentially amongst his people that maybe we aren't aware of. Have you ever forgotten something or left something behind or lost something and been unable to recover it? Have you ever asked God why he allowed you to forget that thing? I've done that before. I'm like, oh God, why did you let me be stupid and leave that behind? I shouldn't blame him for my stupidity. It's my own stupidity. But let's think about this for a second. What if God uses the things that we forget to bless other people? Clearly he did that in ancient Israel, and I imagine he's still working in similar ways today. What if forgetfulness is actually a tool in God's providential toolbox? So when we understand that God's providence can potentially be at work in these incredible ways, we can find peace, I think, in the moments of our forgetfulness, knowing that maybe what I forgot is going to be reused by God in an incredible way. So we can find peace in ourselves, and it can help us to understand that the, quote, random moments of our lives may not be as random as we often perceive them to be.